Our next guest, Oron is a tissue engineering artist and the co-founder and director of Symbiotica, the art and science collaborative research center in Australia. The center is an artistic research lab into the life sciences for artists. It all sounds very scientific, but in other words, Oron is an artist who uses science to create art. Oron and his partner, Ionat Zur, traded easels and brushes for microscopes and petri dishes to grow living organisms from the cells of dead animals. One of their last projects caused quite a stir last year at New York's Museum of Modern Art when a miniature victimless leather coat created from mouse cells had to be, quote-unquote, killed. His pig wings are currently on display in the design collection at MoMA, and he has a special exhibition right now at Exit Art in New York. Oron, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Okay, so for people who are as befuddled by all this as I am, when you talk about tissue art, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about taking fragments from complex organisms, basically parts of living beings, and sustaining them alive and growing them into different shapes using a technique called tissue engineering. So I'm basically growing living sculptures.
Give us an example. About the example that people might be most familiar with is this mouse jacket that got everyone so excited at MoMA. Yeah. What was it? What is it?
What is it? It's basically a miniature jacket that we made out of a special material that breaks down as the cells grow over. So what we've done was to replace this armature, this scaffold in the shape of the jacket, with living mouse cells.
And at a certain point, somebody had to actually kill the jacket, and they said they were kind of upset or disturbed.
Yeah. That's part of our work. We work with life, or we work with what we refer to as semi-living or partial life. Those entities that really confront our perceptions of life, because when we think about something which is alive, like yourself or myself or an animal, it's kind of complete. But then we can take parts of it, and they can be grown in artificial conditions, and we can grow them into other shapes which they were never kind of intended to grow into. So with the killing of it, obviously that's part of everything which is alive dies in the end. And in the case of the MoMA show, it was the first time that we used mouse embryonic stem cells, and those cells grew really, really fast, much faster than what we thought they are going to grow. And they started to shear off the actual scaffold and clog the whole system. So someone needed to turn the life support off.
So is it really alive? I mean, is alive the right term?
That's an interesting thing, being artists who are not trained in science, coming into the laboratories and starting to work with those technologies. We realized how much our cultural perceptions of life are increasingly becoming incompatible with what happens to life in laboratories. So we needed to devise a different language, and that's why we refer to them as being semi-living. You know, they're not alive in the way that we see an animal being alive, but they are alive. Their cells grow, they metabolize, things are happening, they produce different things. But they're not part of an animal anymore. They're part of a techno-scientific apparatus, if you like, where we have those living cells growing.
Reminding us that we don't really still, even after all these centuries of science, have a good definition of what life is.
That's right. What life is really a philosophical question. It's not a scientific one. And that's why I believe it's important for artists to come and play with it to a certain extent, in a serious way.
I was going to say, you're not really playing. You're raising some serious questions. You've been talking a lot recently about this idea of victimless meat. What is it? What do you mean?
So there was always the idea, and it appeared in quite a few science fiction stories, and even Winston Churchill was talking about that in the 1930s, that you can actually grow the meat without the animal. And tissue engineering, this technique of growing those cells outside of bodies, represent a way of doing so. The problem is that in order to grow those cells, we still, in most cases, need to use animal-derived materials. So we were playing on this idea of the victimless, and to a large extent, that was kind of looking at the way in which Western technology is getting better in hiding the victim ever so further, so we don't have to stop and make any ethical decision when we consume the world. And this is a really interesting point, because tissue culture, for example, and the technique that leads to this idea of growing meat without animals, is being promoted by animal welfare organizations as an alternative to animal experimentation.
I was going to say, PETA, the ethical treatment of animals folks, offered, I think, $1 million for the person that figured out how to grow this kind of victimless meat.
Yeah, and I suppose they're going down the right path, because they're saying we would like to see it happening without the use of any animal-derived materials in the process of growing it. It's still not the case. We still need to use what's called fetal calf serum, which is basically the blood plasma from calves that is being drained from the animal and then being used as a supplement to the nutrients that we grow the cells in. So our victimless meat wasn't victimless at all.